Hey everybody, welcome to day 123 of our Bible in a Year Plus podcast. I'm so glad to be with you again today, and we have excellent stories of Elisha the prophet, which I think you're going to enjoy very much. Chuck Colson explained some time back how it was for him in the days when he was special counsel to the president during the Nixon administration, and he was in a position of power. He says, a small band of hand-picked loyalists were there for the most powerful office in the world. He says, think of the power at our fingertips. A mere command from one of us could mobilize generals and cabinet officers, even armies. We could manage billions of dollars in agency budgets. These were his pre-conversion days, and he just felt powerful. And then he says, the phone call came that changed everything. On Saturday, June 17, 1972, his wife and kids were by the pool, and he was getting ready to fire up the grill for a cookout, and the call came that the Watergate scandal had commenced. All through that summer, he was feeling terrible. He says, I felt dead, really dead. And then I met a man who'd been a client of mine before I went to the White House. He was totally different, completely changed. And I asked him what had happened to him, and he said these words, I've accepted Jesus Christ and committed my life to him. I drove over and spent an evening on his porch, and he read to me from a little book by C.S. Lewis. It was about pride, and it described me to a T. And Chuck Colson describes how he was a typical type A personality. He just ran over people. He got whatever he wanted, and he was just interested in himself more than others. And he took the blame. He realized that he had messed up his first marriage. It was all his fault, and he had a lot to think about. After talking to that man, he went out into his car, and he drove just a little ways down the road, and he sat and he cried. He said he cried so hard that he couldn't drive, and he realized that something had to change in his life. And that was when he became a born-again Christian. For the first time in his life, he became aware of his sinfulness and how much he needed to be rescued. And today we're going to read in 2 Kings chapters 4 and 5 about this man who resented God until he was completely humbled and made to realize how much he needed rescue. And so 2 Kings chapter 4, verse 1 in the King James Version of the Bible with updated vocabulary, but you can follow along in another version if you prefer. 2 Kings 4:1. Now there cried a certain woman of the wives of the sons of the prophets unto Elisha, saying, Your servant my husband has died, and you know that your servant did fear the Lord, and the creditor has come to take my 2 sons to be bondservants. And Elisha said to her, What shall I do for you? Tell me, what do you have in the house? And she said, Your handmaid does not have anything in the house except a pot of oil. And he said, Go borrow vessels of all your neighbors, even empty vessels, borrow not a few. And when you have come in, you shall shut the door upon yourself and your sons, and shall pour out into all those vessels, and you shall set aside that which is full. So she went from him and shut the door upon her and upon her sons, who brought the vessels to her, and she poured it out. And it came to pass, when the vessels were full, that she said to her son, Bring me another vessel. And he said to her, There is not another vessel. And the oil was halted. Then she came and told the man of God, and he said, Go, sell the oil and pay your debt, and you and your children live off the rest. And it fell on a day that Elisha passed to Shunem. And there was a great woman, and she constrained him to eat bread. And so it was that as often as he passed by, he turned in there to eat bread. And she said to her husband, See now, I perceive that this is a holy man of God who passes by us continually. Let us make a little room, I ask you, on the wall, and let us set for him there a bed and a table, a stool, and a candlestick. And it shall be when he comes to us that he shall turn in there. And it fell on a day that he came there, and he turned into the room, and he lay there. And he said to Gehazi his servant, Call this Shunammite. And when he had called her, she stood before him. And he said to her, Say now unto her, See, you have been concerned for us with all this care. What is to be done for you? Would you be spoken for to the king, or to the captain of the army? And she answered, I dwell among my own people. And he said, What then is to be done for her? And Gehazi answered, Truly she has no child, and her husband is old. And he said, call her. And when he had called her, she stood in the door. And he said, about this season, according to the time of life, you shall embrace a son. And she said, no, my lord, man of God, do not lie to your handmaid. And the woman conceived and bore a son at that season that Elisha had said to her, according to the time of life. And when the child was grown, it fell on a day that he went out to his father to the harvesters. And he said to his father, my head, my head. And he said to the lad, carry him to his mother. And when he had taken him, he brought him to his mother. He sat on her knees till noon and then died. And she went up and laid him on the bed of the man of God and shut the door upon him and went out. And she called to her husband and said, send me, I ask you, one of the young men and one of the burros, that I may run to the man of God and come again. And he said, why will you go to him today? It is neither new moon nor Sabbath. And she said, it shall be well. And she saddled a burro and said to her servant, drive and go forward. Do not slacken your riding for me unless I tell you. So she went and came to the man of God to Mount Carmel. And it came to pass, when the man of God saw her far off, he said to Gehazi his servant, look, yonder is that Shunammite. Run now, I ask you, to meet her, and say to her, is it well with you? Is it well with the husband? Is it well with the child? And she answered, it is well. And when she came to the man of God to the hill, she caught him by the feet. But Gehazi came near to thrust her away. And the man of God said, leave her alone, for her soul is troubled within her, and the Lord has hid it from me and has not told me. And she said, did I desire a son of my Lord? Did I not say, do not deceive me? Then he said to Gehazi, sash up your loins and take my staff in your hand and go your way. If you meet any man, do not salute him. If any greets you, do not answer him, and lay my staff upon the face of the child. And the mother of the child said, as the Lord lives and as your soul lives, I will not leave you. And he rose up and followed her. And Gehazi passed on before them and laid the staff upon the face of the child, but there was neither voice nor hearing. Therefore he went again to meet him and told him, saying, the child has not awakened. And when Elisha had come into the house, see, the child was dead and laid upon his bed. He went in therefore and shut the door behind those two and prayed to the Lord. And he went up and lay upon the child and put his mouth upon his mouth and his eyes upon his eyes and his hands upon his hands. And he stretched himself upon the child, and the flesh of the child grew warm. Then he returned and walked in the house back and forth and went up and stretched himself again. And the child sneezed 7 times, and the child opened his eyes. And he called Gehazi and called the Shunammite. So he said, and when she was come in unto him, he said, take up your son. And she went in and fell at his feet and bowed herself to the ground and took up her son and went out. And Elisha came again to Gilgal, and there was a famine in the land, and the sons of the prophets were sitting before him. And he said to his servant, put on the great pot and boil stew for the sons of the prophets. And one went out into the field to gather herbs, and found a wild vine, and gathered from it wild gourds, his lap full, and came and shred them into the pot of stew, for they did not know them. So they poured out for the men to eat. And it came to pass, as they were eating of the stew, they cried out and said, O man of God, there's death in the pot. And they could not eat of it. And he said, then bring flour. And he cast it into the pot, and he said, pour it out for the people, so that they may eat. And there was no harm in the pot. And there came a man from Baal Shalisha, and brought the man of God bread of the first fruits, 20 loaves of barley, and full ears of grain in the husk of it. And he said, give to the people that they may eat. And his server said, what, should I set this before 100 men? He said again, give the people that they may eat. For thus declares the Lord, they shall eat, and shall leave some of it. So he set it before them, and they ate and left some of it, according to the word of the Lord. Chapter 5. Now Naaman, captain of the army of the king of Syria, was a great man with his master, and honorable, because by him the Lord had given deliverance into Syria. He was also a mighty man of valor, but he was a leper. And the Syrians had gone out by companies, had brought away captive out of the land of Israel a little servant girl, and she waited on Naaman's wife. And she said to her mistress, I wish before God my Lord were with the prophet that is in Samaria, for he would recover him of his leprosy. And one went in and told his Lord, saying, Thus and thus said the servant girl that is from the land of Israel. And the king of Syria said, Come now, go, and I will send a letter to the king of Israel. And he departed, and took with him 10 talents of silver, and 6,000 pieces of gold, and 10 changes of raiment. And he brought the letter to the king of Israel, saying, Now when this letter has come to you, see, I have with it sent Naaman my servant to you, that you may recover him from his leprosy. And it came to pass, when the king of Israel had read the letter, that he tore his clothes and said, Am I God to kill and make alive, that this man sends me to recover a man of his leprosy? Therefore consider, I ask you, and see how he seeks a quarrel against me. And it was so, when Elisha, the man of God, had heard that the king of Israel had torn his clothes, that he sent to the king, saying, Why have you torn your clothes? Let him now come to me, and he shall know that there is a prophet in Israel. So Naaman came with his horses and with his chariot, and stood at the door of the house of Elisha. And Elisha sent a messenger to him, saying, Go, wash in Jordan 7 times, and your flesh shall come again to you, and you shall be clean. But Naaman was angry, and went away, and said, See, I thought, he will surely come out to me, and stand and call on the name of the Lord his God, and wave his hand over the place, and recover the leper. Are not Abana and Pharpar rivers of Damascus better than all the waters of Israel? May I not wash in them and be clean? So he turned and went away in a rage. And his servants came near and spoke to him and said, My father, if the prophet had told you to do some great thing, would you not have done it? How much rather then, when he says to you, Wash and be clean? Then he went down and dipped himself 7 times in Jordan, according to the saying of the man of God, and his flesh came again like the flesh of a little child, and he was clean. And he returned to the man of God, he and all his company, and came and stood before him. And he said, See, now I know that there is no God in all the earth, but in Israel. Now therefore I ask you, take a blessing of your servant. But he said, As the Lord lives, before whom I stand, I will receive none. And he urged him to take it, but he refused. And Naaman said, Shall there not then, I ask you, be given to your servant 2 mules, burden of earth? For your servant will not henceforth offer any burnt offering nor sacrifice to any other god but to the Lord. In this the Lord pardon your servant, that when my master goes into the house of Rimmon to worship there, and he leans on my hand, and I bow myself in the house of Rimmon, when I bow down myself in the house of Rimmon, the Lord pardon your servant in this thing. And he said to him, Go in peace. So he departed from him a little way. But Gehazi, the servant of Elisha, the man of God, said, See, my master has spared Naaman, this Syrian, in not receiving at his hands that which he brought. But as the Lord lives, I will run after him and take something from him. So Gehazi followed after Naaman, and when Naaman saw him running after him, he dismounted from the chariot to meet him and said, Is all well? And he said, All is well. My master has sent me, saying, See, even now there has come to me from Mount Ephraim 2 young men of the sons of the prophets. Give them, I ask you, a talent of silver and 2 changes of raiment. And Naaman said, Oh, be content. Take 2 talents. And he urged him, and bound 2 talents of silver in 2 bags with 2 changes of garments, and laid them upon 2 of his servants, and they carried them before him. And when he came to the tower, he took them from their hand and stowed them in the house, and he let the men go, and they departed. But he went in and stood before his master, and Elisha said to him, Where did you come from, Gehazi? And he said, Your servant went nowhere. And he said to him, Did not my heart go with you when the man turned again from his chariot to meet you? Is this a time to receive money, and to receive garments, and olive yards, and vineyards, and sheep, and oxen, and male servants and female servants? The leprosy, therefore, of Naaman shall cling to you and to your seed forever. And he went out from his presence, a leper as white as snow. And that concludes 2 Kings chapter 5. Well, okay, exciting stories of Elisha again, right? First of all, we have Elisha visiting a widow. This is a widow from one of the sons of the prophets, and he was a godly man, but now he has died, and his widow is penniless. And so Elisha says, what should I do for you? And she has nothing in her house but oil. And so he tells her to round up all of the empty vessels from her neighbors and take them into her house and pour her oil into the empty vessels. And this is a bottomless flask of oil. And it's a lot like, remember, Elijah's widow's bottomless flour and bottle of oil. It's the same thing, so similar. And only remember that Elijah's widow was a Gentile, and Elisha's widow is a Israelite. And then after that is all settled, she sells all of the oil, and she has plenty of money now, and her sons don't have to go into bondage as servants. In chapter 4, verse 8, then we move to another situation, and here Elisha is going to run into a wealthy Shunammite family. And the woman, especially in the family, is godly, and of course, these are Israelite people. And so she decides that she and her husband would like to set up a prophet's chamber, a little room for Elisha to stay in whenever he passes by. And so he appreciates that and says, now what can I do for you? And Gehazi says, well, she doesn't have a son, and her husband is old. She never will have a son unless we do this supernaturally. And so Elisha works it out with God to give the woman a son. But shortly after the son has grown from infancy, he becomes sick. Something is wrong. He says, my head, and something is wrong. And he actually dies. And so we see that now the woman rushes to Mount Carmel, where Elisha is, and says, you just have to come and help my son. And so Elisha rushes back, and now you see that he is going to raise the child to life. He stretches himself on the child, and he does this 3 times. And he does this 2 times, which is similar to Elijah, who did it 3 times. And so you see, they both have a widow that they help with a bottomless flask of oil, plus, in one case, bottomless flour. And they both have a reviving of a son. And so this is a great story. And we see that Elisha is doing just the same things that Elijah did. And so it's great. In chapter 4, verses 38 through 41, we have the story of the death in the pot. And so there's a famine, and Elisha comes and says, we'll make a stew. And so one of the sons of the prophets goes out, and he accidentally picks gourds that are poisonous. And so they begin to eat the stew that has been made, including the poisonous gourds that have been dropped in it. They said, oh, Elisha, there's death in the pot. We're going to die. And so Elisha says, bring me some flour. He brings some flour, he throws it in the pot of stew, and then it is now no longer toxic, and they all eat and are filled. And so that's a great story. It reminds us that when there's a famine in the land, the Lord, who is not one of the fertility cult gods, he is the true one who provides the harvest and the herds and the flocks. And so this is, a message to everyone that the true God is the one they need to turn to and turn away from all these fertility cult evil spirits. All right, and we come to chapter 4, verses 42 through 44, and we still have a problem of famine. And so once again, Elisha addresses that. A nice farmer comes along, bringing 20 flatbreads, 20 flatbreads, plus 20 sheaves of barley grain. And the command comes from Elisha that we're going to serve this to the 100 people who are gathered. Well, 20 tortillas, 20 flatbreads, and 20 sheaves that can be ground into grain, that's not enough to feed 100 people. And Elisha says, just do it. And sure enough, it's like when Jesus fed the 5,000, only here it's Elisha feeding the 100. And they all eat until they're full, and they have leftovers. So we have a feeding of the 100, which is a little bit like the feeding of the 5,000. Now chapter 5. Chapter 5, we have the wonderful story of Naaman. He's a Syrian, a Gentile, right? A Syrian general, and he has leprosy. He has taken captive a little Israelite servant girl, and she apparently is so delightful. You wonder how does the Lord give her such a sunshiny disposition? She says, oh, if only we were in Israel and Samaria, Elisha could fix your husband. And so word gets back, and Naaman actually goes and eventually meets up with Elisha. And Elisha tells Naaman he has to, Elisha doesn't even come out personally, right? He tells his servant to tell Naaman, just go dip in the Jordan River 7 times and you'll be well. Naaman is incensed. Elisha is treating him like a leper, from the Old Testament law. Elisha is treating him like a leper. Elisha is treating him like a sinner. And this is a man who has great wealth and great dignity in Syria. And he is incensed. He's basically saying, I'm not going to be treated like a sinner. Isn't that interesting? And then his helpers, his administrators say, well, Naaman, if he had asked you to do some great thing, you would have done it, right? Well, now he's asking you to do a simple thing, absurd though it might seem. It is simple. You could do it. And Naaman says, okay, I will. And he dips in the Jordan 7 times, and his skin is healed. No more leprosy. Now he goes to Elisha, and he confesses that Elisha's God is the only true God in the whole wide world. And he is loyal to him from this day forward. And that's the story of Naaman. Except Naaman wanted to give Elisha a gift. Elisha says, no, you have to know this is from God, not from me. You must know it's from God, not me. And so Naaman says, okay. And he leaves. But Gehazi, filled with greed and covetousness, he says, I wish I had some of that wealth that Naaman just offered. Elisha said, we want God to have the credit, not human beings, but I want some of the credit. I want some of the wealth. So he chases Naaman down, and he is given 2 talents of silver and 2 changes of clothing, both, very costly, very, very desirable. And Gehazi lies, and he comes back home, and Elisha says, where have you been? And Gehazi says, I haven't been anywhere. And Elisha says, did not my heart go with you when you hurried to catch the man and you met him at his chariot? You can't fool God. God knows what you're doing. And that, of course, is a great lesson in and of itself. And so Gehazi gets the leprosy that was once on Naaman, and that's how he lives all the rest of his life. Unbelievable, right? So what's our great life lesson today? I want to go back to the outrage that Naaman felt when he was not even personally interviewed by Elisha. He was treated like a sinner. And we don't like to be treated like sinners. Remember, we want to be treated like dignitaries, like powerful people, sort of like Chuck Colson at the beginning of our episode. I don't want to be treated like a sinner. I want to be treated like a powerful person. But we are sinners. We are beggars. We are borrowers, and we need to be rescued. And only when we are in moments where we're aware of our sin and our need of rescue, our beggarly ways, only in those moments are we really in our right minds. And so obedience to God's absurd policies is all that sinners deserve. It's what we need to do. It's what we must do. It's what people like us ought to do. And the whole test with Elisha and Naaman was just obey. We're going to treat you like a sinner. Will you be a sinner or will you obey? And so now you know what our life lesson has to be. The Lord is asking us, essentially, are you going to be treated like a sinner? Are you going to obey or not? And we're going to say yes to the Lord. We will acknowledge our leprosy, our sin, our need for rescue, and we will obey even if it doesn't make sense to us. So I hope you'll pray in your heart as I pray out loud, okay? Father God, we hear you, and when you ask us to obey, we want to obey. We are saying we need to be rescued. We recognize that we are sinners and lepers and beggars and borrowers. And today, yes, we will obey. We need your rescue. And we come to you as 10,000 times before to rescue us through this day, to help us through this day as only you can. And we will obey you in every way. So we thank you in advance for that wonderful rescue. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, God bless you. You know, today's a big day. This was day 123 of our Bible in a Year Plus podcast, and that means 4 months now we've been doing this. If we liken our journey to a 12-month sightseeing trip with the Lord, 12-day sightseeing trip with the Lord, then we're through 1/3 of our journey right now. 4 months is done. 1/3 is over. 2/3 yet to come. And yes, believe it or not, the best is yet to come. So thank you for joining me for 4 months, and I hope you'll join me again tomorrow if the Lord gives us the health to do it and the ability to do it. I hope I get to see you for day 124 tomorrow. God bless you.